A boom in staycations over the COVID pandemic has led to a 40% rise in the number of people buying properties to rent out to tourists in England. The seaside town of Scarborough has seen the biggest rise in holiday-let properties, with almost 1,000 more rental homes now than in 2018. Second place went to North Devon. The figure went from 1,319 to 1,758. Some campaigners there are calling for tighter regulations, as they claim holiday-let properties are pushing established residents out and ruining local neighbourhoods. Let's talk to the founder of the North Devon Housing Crisis Group, Emma Hookway, who joins me now. Emma, welcome to you. An hour ago, we had a property expert who said, look, all these NIMBYs complaining about money coming into an area without which it would collapse. I think you take a different view.
Well, we do rely upon the tourist industry. I'm not, saying that we don't, but it's oversaturated at the moment, and what we need to do is get the balance back, which we had previously before COVID.
We go about doing that, Emma, and just paint a picture of how a neighbourhood can be hollowed out sometimes. Villages I can think of in the prettier parts of England where you go there in the week, there aren't many lights on until the weekend.
I mean, in all fairness, there's a village very close to me, Georgeham, and the high occupancy of second homes and tourist places means that during winter it's absolute ghost town. I think this is more prevalent at Christmas time because you'll walk down the streets and you won't see the Christmas tree lights on. It's really sad that also this primary school in that area is also having to advertise for children because they're at risk of closure because they can no longer get children into the schools.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it becomes a kind of tax on prettiness, doesn't it? If you live in a pretty community that people want to live in with a lovely view and lovely architecture, people will want to move there, and the locals who can trace their ancestry there back generations. Well, if they're not earning lots of decent money, and often in rural areas that's difficult, they've got to move to the nearest town.
It's not even the nearest town anymore because the nearest town is being saturated as well. North Devon is notoriously pretty across the board. So, I live in Braunton, but if I couldn't find a property in Braunton, I wouldn't either be able to find one in Ilfracombe, I wouldn't be able to find one in Barnstaple, Westwood Hoe, Bideford. The place, literally, there is no rentals at all available, hardly at all. And if they are, they're extortionately overpriced. We've seen rental prices increase within 2 years of about £300 to £400 on a property.
And then when we talk about holiday rentals, is there a problem with the sort of longer lets or with something like Airbnb? I'm a complete hypocrite about this. I sort of hate what Airbnb can do to a neighbourhood. It can hollow it out in this endless hamster wheel of a new resident. But even as I become one of those new residents, because I quite like the idea of staying there with my kids,
yeah.
What is your objection more with the Airbnb model or with the second homeowner?
It's neither. I don't necessarily object to any of them because I think everyone's entitled to do what they want to do. It's the oversaturation. What we've seen due to COVID and people staycationing in is that second homes were normally more high spec houses, and so were the holiday lets. But now what we're seeing is landlords giving Section 21s to local residents in your 2-bed, your 3-bedroom home that never before would have been considered for a holiday home. Or they're selling them again because property prices have increased by about 30% this side of the water where I live. So for a lot of people, it's an opportunity to make a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's undeniably happening, isn't it? And in a sense, when inflation's really high and stocks and shares and, your savings account isn't doing very well, people are looking for alternative ways of sweating their assets and making their money work for them. And is there a role here for local democracy? Again, our previous guest 1 hour ago was talking about the NIMBYs, for which sometimes I just look at a parish council, or a borough council that can really speak for people who are local and upset.
Well, we're pushing as a group for quite a few things. One of them is to have regulation on the amount of holiday lets that are allowed within the area. Because quite often the roads can't actually even cope for the amount of people that are coming in now. Parking doesn't allow for it, facilities don't allow for it. We're also looking that for people being put into temporary accommodation, that the rules get updated because we've got people now living in temporary accommodation, which isn't temporary anymore because there's nowhere for them to live. So they can be there 9 months, 12 months, and they're not allowed to have people come over to stay. They're not allowed to leave the property for 24 hours, otherwise they run the risk of losing it. We're also looking at trying to get the government to acknowledge that our rental prices have increased by so much that they take this into account when they're using like the housing calculator for universal credit benefits for people.
Emma, it's a tricky problem, and you can be looked at from different directions, can't it? But you've offered us one perspective today. Emma Hookway, thanks very much for your time. Thanks a lot. Harry Mount, my studio guest today. Harry, we talked about this an hour ago, and we're aware of the flip side of this, which is that sometimes in more isolated communities, incomers, grockles, whatever you want to call them, they can bring money in that's much needed, but you can understand the grievance of people who've lived there for years, whose family have lived there for years.
Of course you can. I think the answer is to let people build more. I mean, most villages, towns and cities in this country have gradually grown over the centuries. They begin with medieval heart, Georgian ring round the edge, if you like it, like a sort of archery target, Victorian buildings on the edge. And then that's come to a halt in many places because of planning legislation. And so the answer seems to me, as you say, people want to go to these beautiful places, is allow people to build beautiful new houses, perhaps keep some of them just to locals, on the edge of those pretty villages and towns.
I was just minded when we saw the, again, apologies for listeners on radio, lovely pictures, beach in Devon. I mean, we've always loved our beaches, haven't we? I'm sure, but I was on the South Coast recently and reading a magazine about coast living, and I thought, my God, the country's now obsessed with living by the sea, isn't it?
Well, it is, and that has actually boomed under COVID. As you said, the amount of people staying on a holiday in Britain has gone up by 40%. And I could see why. My family have got a second home in Pembrokeshire, and there is something magical about being near the sea, and it's a dream for all of us that's relatively easy to do, because I think it's right. I'm right in saying any house in Britain is no less than 70 miles from the sea. So it is attainable, but only if you've got the money, obviously.
Harry, thanks very much indeed.